cause hearing. And then they, they determine, again, if there's probable cause, they're the ones that enter the order committing the individual to an inpatient facility. Their role is twofold. Their role is just to safeguard the rights and interests of the individual who's the respondent in this case, as well as the interest of the state. In a case when we are doing these, we are the individuals certainly have many due process rights because we are trying to, their liberties at stake, right? We're trying to do something that they do not want to do and involuntarily put them someplace they don't want to go. So the mental hygiene commissioner really takes that role seriously in terms of the interest of the individual. It also sets forth the duties of all the parties, including the prosecuting attorney and the sheriff. There has been, and I will say, since I did this presentation about a month ago, I think I submitted it, there's actually been some updates. And so I'll talk about that. It's not just the sheriff anymore, but there's been some updates in the law. It also establishes the process for the involuntary custody for examination, as well as the process for the actual involuntary hospitalization. This is the language you'll see. It goes back to this and everything from the petition to what the mental hygiene commissioner is looking at in a probable cause hearing. And it is this individual who we call the respondent, are they likely to cause serious harm to themselves or others? That's the lens it looks through for everything. And West Virginia Code defines likely to cause serious harm. It means an individual who's exhibiting behaviors consistent with, and you'll see this repeatedly, recognized mental disorder or addiction. Those are the two things that we're looking for. And then there's 5 different subsections. Specifically, has the individual inflicted or attempted to inflict bodily harm on another? Have they, by their own actions, placed others in a reasonable apprehension or reasonable fear of physical harm? Do they present a danger to themselves or to others in their care? The 4th one is whether, I believe when we pull that up there, it's whether they've actually attempted or threatened to attempt suicide. And provision 5, I don't think a lot of people know this one exists, but provision 5 is specifically if an individual is able to meet their basic needs. If they're unable to meet their basic needs, and because of that inability to meet their basic needs, it causes a substantial likelihood of bodily harm, then that is grounds to move forward with the petition. I want to pull up the actual petition so you can see. This is, again, and this is the link. This is the petition for, you'll see it's for every county. So Jay, if you don't mind pulling that up, I think you're gonna. So this is the application, and I can tell you, we can scroll through it, but it is fairly self-explanatory. The information you'll see on the first page, again, you'll see they use the word respondent. They need to know who this person is. They need to describe them, give the information on their contact, where we can find them, their address, their phone number. As you can imagine, sometimes the respondents are not easy to track down. And we've had cases, particularly with students, with them being transient sometimes, and Allison can probably talk about this later, is we don't have accurate local information as to where they are. And so, it's crucial to give identifying information. The part of the county, they're going to have this hearing where the person is a resident or where they're present. With us, it's usually where they're present because most of our students are not residents of Mon County, as a rule of thumb. And then you are the applicant. I know the language gets confusing, but you're the applicant and you need to provide your information, your relationship to the respondent. And then you'll see it asks questions that go very much through the statute in terms of, do you believe they're addicted to drugs and alcohol or other substances? Do you believe they're mentally ill? And then you need to provide information as to why you believe that. And then again, that follows that statute. Do you believe because of their mental illness or addiction, they're a harm to themselves or others? And again, check those boxes. This number 13 is very important. This is the documentation that you're going to provide as to why you believe that this person, again, is a threat of substantial harm to themselves or others. This is important. I can tell you, as you can imagine, that what you're filing is that there's an imminent sense of harm. So timeliness is important. If something has happened in the past day or two, that's best case scenario. I will tell you, we put lots of things here. We work, and again, I know Allison, when she does our case study, will highlight this. We work very, very closely with our university police department. A lot of the students that we have will have welfare checks or will have had, run-ins with law enforcement. We get copies of all of that and provide all of those police reports as part of it. This is emails. If the students have been exhibiting behavior in emails or saying things in email, you guys are not surprised by this generation. There's a lot of video. People post and tag themselves on social media. Anything that you have where you can provide links to that or information for them to review. it's very helpful. So this is the time to provide all of that information so that they can, this is really the place to make your case. You'll see too, you can add additional, it always is fine. You don't have to just put it in those 4 lines. You can certainly provide extra pages. And then you may, are they a suicide risk? Are they violent? Possession of weapons? Some of the information you just may not know. You know, have they been hospitalized? You may not know their medical care. Again, if you're not a family member filling this out, you just may not be privy to that. So as you scroll through this page and in the next page, again, you certainly can put NA if you don't know. Don't put yes or no if you're not aware of it. You don't know their medications possibly. So there are some things, and again, that you may not know. The part that I want you on part 23, I guess it goes without being said that the applicant, whoever fills this out, should be someone with firsthand information, the person who can substantiate what's going on. I will say we've been able to get around that a little bit, but we just had a most recent case that Allison and I were involved in, and it involved a very, very vulnerable international student, and the only support system she had was her brother, and he did not want to fill this out because he didn't want to alienate her. He didn't want it to be, you know, again, he just didn't want to, like I should say, to further alienate her. So we actually put the information in, and I actually wrote in that we had, I mean, whenever I put next of kin, that he had firsthand information and he would be presenting, he would be willing to participate as a witness. And made it very clear that the reason why he wasn't an applicant is because he didn't want to alienate, you know, the respondent. So it's best case scenario is that the person with that information, sometimes parents, people don't want to fill this out, and as an institution, we may feel there's a need. So again, you know, we may not have all that information, and if they don't want to participate, feel free to put all that on there and make it very clear who has firsthand information and who's going to be available. We can skip over the warning because I'm going to go over that here in a little bit. And then this must be notarized. We had one that was held up, because I can tell you, I faxed one in a couple months ago and it wasn't notarized and it wasn't a big deal. They accepted it. The last one, 2 times ago, we did one and it wasn't notarized and they rejected it, and it held things up. So it's really important that you have it notarized when you fax this in. So that's the application in a nutshell. Jay, we can go back to the PowerPoint. I will say it's important really at the end of what you were verifying in that petition is that the applicant, again, that you have reason to believe that they're mentally ill and likely to cause serious harm to themselves or other. That's what the verification is. So that is at the end when you're attesting to it, that's what you're attesting to. So what happens after you fill that, after you send that in, right? The mental health commissioner, mental hygiene commissioner is going to review it, and they're going to determine whether or not you've met that threshold, whether they believe in fact that there is a substantial harm based on the evidence in that petition. If they don't believe so, they can deny it outright. And some of this has changed too, and we'll go over this in a second. Or after the individual is examined by a physician or mental health professional. If you don't meet that threshold, then they can deny it. So really, this is the standard. If the examination does not reveal that addiction or mental health, that there's addiction or mental health, and that there's a likelihood to cause serious harm to themselves or others based on illness or addiction, it will be dismissed, and the individual, if they've been picked up, will be released, or there will not even be an order to pick them up. If you meet the threshold and the mental hygiene commissioner determines that this should move to a probable cause hearing, they actually will enter an order directing, and it says the sheriff. And so I do want to clarify, the sheriff, through all this has been a recent change in the law, is that it's no longer the sheriff, it's actually the primary law enforcement in the area, which is key, because Allison and I had one several years ago where it took 4 or 5 days to pick someone up because the sheriff was in charge of all of that transportation and it was a burden. So I believe that's the basis for the changes. It's not just the sheriff now, it's the law enforcement, because you figure they have to pick them up, take them to be examined, take them to the hearing. And in the case we had recently, the student was actually committed in Charleston. So the transportation, so it can take an entire day's worth of time. So that has been changed, that it's not the sheriff now, it's they use the words primary law enforcement agency. But they will have an order directing the primary law enforcement agency to transport this respondent to be evaluated by a psychologist or a physician. It also says, they use the word forthwith. That's a word we love in the law. It must be done forthwith, within 24 hours. Now I can tell you that doesn't always happen, but that is what the law, it's supposed to be done within 24 hours. And it also provides for the appointment of counsel for the respondent. So they have an attorney that is appointed to represent them. So that's what will happen if they do find it meets that threshold. That's the order that then will set it for a probable cause hearing. And I do want to say too, when the applicant, when the respondent is picked up, we've had a case here where the respondent, because we're the part of, the basis, if you go back to it, is that we're saying this person's at a risk to cause substantial harm to themselves or others. They are handcuffed or shackled when they are picked up and they're taken in. That is unsavory to some people. I know it's upsetting to parents, and I understand that as a parent, that this person's vulnerable. But again, that is protocol, likely law enforcement protocol. I would imagine it's consistent in order to protect themselves. So just to be aware, it's a smooth process, but it is somewhat adversarial in nature just by the nature of it. So if it goes to a probable cause hearing, as the applicant, you're going to be called to testify. You're the applicant. You're the one that's presenting this information. And so really the focus, again, it always goes back to what the law says. So really you need to be focusing on the facts that indicate specifically the facts that talk about why they are more likely than not mentally ill or addicted and likely to cause harm to themselves or others. So the specific facts that you can pull out. I know that's hard, and I do think it's helpful sometimes when we're the applicant and we're not family. It's easier for us, I think, to get right to the facts and present that information. We're less emotionally tied to it. But you need to be prepared to provide any supporting evidence and documentation. They're going to ask you questions. You'll get asked questions by the mental hygiene commissioner and from the respondent or their attorney. So you need to be prepared and have all your evidence kind of ready to go. Sometimes you get a little bit of an opening statement as to why you're here, but I think each mental hygiene commissioner probably does it differently. The rules of evidence do apply. I mean, this is a legal proceeding. The respondent, again, they're provided counsel, and so the respondent does have a right in these hearings. Again, they have due process rights. And so they certainly have a right to confront witnesses and testimonies that are presented from you or from the mental health provider against them, anything that they disagree with, and they can certainly present evidence and witness on their own. They also have the right to remain silent. I will say, I know this may not be a popular opinion. I know some people think lawyers get involved in the process and mess things up. That's generally the rule of thumb on our campus, is that when you get lawyers involved, it's not the best. I will say I like when we deal with lawyers in this case, because again, oftentimes the respondent, I mean, we're trying to do something they don't want to do, right? It's involuntary. And so oftentimes the attorney does kind of cut through that and is able to kind of take some control and ask very pointed questions, and again, kind of take the lead on that. So I think that is very helpful. You can also ask questions of the respondent or any witnesses. So again, it's like any kind of hearing. You're allowed to everybody's allowed to question the witnesses, cross-examine, and make sure that they get the opportunity to present all the evidence they want. There's also the mental health professionals present, and they usually at the end kind of give their summary as to what their findings are, if they believe that in fact this person is mentally ill or addicted, and whether they're likely or not to cause substantial harm. And you have a right to ask questions of the mental health professional or the physician. In our case, it's always been a mental health professional. And what is probable cause? So really it's reasonable grounds. That's what we always look at. So what they're looking at the conclusion of the hearing is whether they're going to enter an order stating that there are reasonable grounds that deterioration will occur without clinically necessary treatment, or that there's probable cause, again, or reasonable grounds to believe that the individual as a result, again, goes back to that mental illness or substance use disorder is likely to cause serious harm to themselves or others. So if in fact they find that, now they may find there's no probable cause and the case is dismissed. We've also had some cases where, they're always looking at least restrictive means. And so if this is something that can be accomplished with intensive outpatient, if there's family support, we had one hearing where parents came in and said, we're willing to assist our son with intensive treatment and make sure that he gets to counseling. And so they were able to avoid inpatient because they had a kind of an alternative path that the mental hygiene commissioner believed was appropriate. Someone can also change their mind and go voluntarily if they believe that that's always an option for someone to proceed. And you will see the benefits to that, overall in the long term for individuals here in a moment. But if probable cause is found, then an order is entered, and it basically committing an individual to an inpatient facility. If probable cause is found, they're going to be placed in a mental health or addiction treatment facility for a maximum of 30 days. And this is the key part, and this is kind of disheartening at times. They may be released immediately or later. Well, not because of this part, but if at any point they find that the grounds are no longer there, that they're not likely to cause substantial harm, they can be released. So we have sometimes students, and I always say students because that's who I work with, but we have students that may be dismissed within 24, 48 hours, again, if that threshold is no longer met. But from under the law, we cannot keep them, that you can keep them for a maximum of 35 days until you have an official hearing. And how long are they hospitalized? Again, it all depends, and it goes back to they're required. This is the key, to release them when they can no longer benefit from hospitalization or the conditions justifying commitment no longer exist. It says here that they must have a probable cause hearing. It cannot exceed 15 days. Now, it has to be instituted within 15 days and completed within 30. I have not had any, and I will say this one thing that I find frustrating as the applicant, again, because they're not family and I'm not next to kin, I don't generally get this information as to what happens next. I don't. I've not had a case where someone's followed up and let me know what's happening. Now, they have let me know that the person's being transferred to Charleston or whatever facility on the front end, but once they're committed, I don't get any information. And this is, if you're involuntarily hospitalized, you certainly do, and you'll see that it's what's warning on the petition. This is spelled out very clearly on the petition whenever you're feeling it as the applicant. If the individual is involuntarily hospitalized, they're prohibited from possessing and receiving firearms and ammunition. They're also required to immediately surrender their firearms, and they're subject to actually federal charges if in fact they violate this moving forward. So there are some things certainly if involuntarily committed that you do give up along the way. And that's kind of in a nutshell. I will say, there's the House bill that just passed. One of the things that I have read, and I have not done a deep dive, in addition to changing it from sheriff to the law enforcement agency, it does say that it now waives the medical clearance requirement, because the way it is now, if an individual is picked up and before they are taken to the hearing, and all of our hearings have been Zoom, but if they're taken to the hearing, they have to be cleared medically. At least that's the way it's currently been. And they have to, for us, it's a COVID test. If it's a female, it's a pregnancy test. They basically do a medical clearance to make sure this person doesn't have any additional medical needs that are immediate or that the facility needs to be aware of. Yeah, House Bill 4377, exactly. I have that right here. I don't know for that one specifically all those changes, but there have been some updates. So just important, some of that information may have shifted a little bit. But I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if this is something you all deal with on your campuses or not, but I'm happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability.
Please unmute or use the chat, raise hand, fire away.
Having had a lot more experience with this than I want, not on my college campus, but as an inpatient psychiatric hospital employee, I'm wondering who supported and prompted these changes?
You mean the changes in the new House bill?
Yes.
I can't speak to, but I will say I did read some articles today before we met, and I know one of the things that did say that the sheriffs were obviously quite happy because they weren't getting paid also for their time and so for their transportation and costs. So I don't know if they were the driving force on that provision to make sure that it was kind of spread across all law enforcement agencies. As far as the medical clearance, I did read something too about telehealth, that you can do things virtually. So I don't know about that piece of it, but I would venture to guess that the sheriff's departments were at least partially behind that specific change.
Yeah, well, it's a great change, because I know what a burden it is on the sheriff's department to have to do the transporting, and they have to, they have to stay there with the person, can't leave them. And that gets to be really, really difficult if time gets.
I agree. And then the one case that we've had here, I mean, literally, I think Allison can speak. I think it took 3 days to pick up someone, and it was a very serious case. And so I think it's also detrimental to the respondents to have to wait that long. So I think it's burdensome all around.
Yeah. I came this close to having to do one very recently, and was prepared. The parents were prepared to be the petitioner, but fortunately, the young man decided he would go voluntarily. But we were ready. I had already printed out the paperwork and talked to them about this is what's going to have to happen. And they did have, when they got him to the hospital though, because he was not as cooperative as they would like, they had to be really assertive. The family had to be very assertive. And I said, be sure that you tell them exactly what's been going on, and be assertive.
And I think we find, at least, the families can help or hurt, right? I mean, they can be very helpful if they acknowledge what's happening, or, we've had some family members that actually are an impediment, because they don't have a full understanding, or they're just not willing to cooperate with us.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa, I see you unmuted. Do you have a question? Lisa, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, we can hear you. Did you unmuted? Do you have a question or no? Or just maybe accidentally unmuted?
No, I don't have a question. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Gary, I had a real basic question, and that is just in terms of if an institution, let's say maybe a counselor at an institution takes a student to the hospital, is it better if the staff member or faculty from the institution fills out the form versus someone working in the hospital?
Yeah, I would say, I would say whoever has that information. So yes, I would think whoever has in the hospital, they probably, it's just, I'm assuming they just met them unless this person's been in and out and has some rapport. So yes, it's obviously ideal for the applicant whoever has the most firsthand information, that's the most ideal, or has access to that. So yes, I think in instances, I can't think of any time where we've had to face that, but yeah, I think the institution, and I can tell you, we had a case recently where we were concerned with maybe some liability with the student being released. What we did, like if something happened, they were released, and if something occurred, because again, this is an international student that lost visa status, and there are lots of things happening, and we were kind of directed from our general counsel's office that we took the step that we needed to get them committed, and then once we got them there, really kind of our liability would cease, because at that point it's in someone else's hands and they're taking it from there.
Thanks.
Cynthia, I see you put a couple of tips in the chat. Do you mind just maybe explaining some of those?
Sure. So just from my experience on the inpatient hospital side, like Margaret, make sure that you fill out those forms completely, get them notarized, because that just prolongs the effort. And sometimes mental hygiene commissioners will just say no probable cause because the forms aren't filled out correctly. So you don't want to get into that situation. Also, I think the other thing is mental hygiene commissioners interpret the law differently in every county. And so that's a little frustrating sometimes. Get to know your mental hygiene commissioners, invite them to meet your team, go meet with them, talk to them about what their preferences are. I think it really does help to smooth those involuntary commitments. And then I think the last thing I said was, obviously, if you can get someone to go voluntarily, they lose certain rights for their lifetime, like owning firearms, if they are committed involuntarily. So sometimes that's enough to convince them to go voluntarily. I did have a question, Carrie, though, because I know, and in the past, the wait has been much longer, but as they can wait for up to 24 hours to pick someone up on a probable cause, what are you doing on campus to keep those students safe during that period of time, if you know where they are?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that question, because I think that's going to come up in Allison's case study, because so we can answer that in specifically in the case study. But I think, Cynthia, part of the reason why we're able to navigate this is because we have good partnerships across our campus and this is in particular our police, which Allison will explain. So it all depends, I think, on, and I don't know, especially if someone's living on campus, that I don't know the answer to that. We've had some, luckily for us, we've had kind of parallel criminal cases because students have engaged in behavior, and that's given us some tools. I will say, I want to echo what you said about having a good relationship. The mental hygiene commissioners, because I was a practicing attorney in this town for a while, I know them pretty well. And the other thing too, I want to, at least with our mental hygiene commissioners, I know it's kind of scary sometimes to go through a legal process. Our mental hygiene commissioners will really lead you. They will ask the pertinent questions. And so as far as what you need to know, it's important to have the information, but if you're missing something, they will tend to get there and ask you. And so again, I would focus more on making sure you have all the evidence and are able to go through it. But at least I hope if anybody else has had that experience, the mental hygiene commissioners really do a good job, at least in our county, of making sure that we have the opportunity to present it and knowing what's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does differ from county to county. So again, I just can't recommend more highly to get to know your mental hygiene commissioners and develop a relationship with them.
Yeah, great advice.
I'm really happy to hear that the person that's the applicant has the right to ask questions, because when I've been in hearings, I was never advised of that. I was always the person on the defensive side, even though I was a mental health professional. not always treated as such. I didn't think it was, going in with the facts. And the thing that I used to get questioned a whole lot about was it had to be firsthand information. If I hadn't seen it or heard it, then I could include it in my petition. And so, but I always felt like when I went, it was not the individual, it wasn't the respondent that was on the hot seat. It was me, the applicant.
I hate to hear that. Again, I have not had that experience, but and they have allowed us to kind of make sure that we, ask the proper questions. But it is tough, and that firsthand information is ideal. But I think for us, sometimes I would hate to hesitate and move forward because you don't have the firsthand information. I think I'm a fan of. I think you swing if you believe that this person's you swing. If you miss, you swung. You know what I mean? And I think you give it your best shot. In instances. So I would get less worried about, do I have all the information? And just, I think sometimes the effort, you make it and I also think we got to think about liability. If we believe that this person on our campus is going to cause harm, then I think you have an obligation to move forward.
I agree. I agree with that 100%.
Not but I know some people are hesitant because they're like, well, we don't have firsthand information. I hear that a lot. And my suggestion is just move.
Mm-hmm.
Carrie, I think you bring up a good point also, and that is that there is a chance that it'll get turned down. And so have another plan, have a plan for how you're going to keep that student safe and keep your campus safe as a backup if the petition is turned down.
I agree. There's always got to be a plan B. That's where Allison comes in. She's our care person. So I'm plan A, she's plan B. Actually, she's plan A and B.
Any other questions? Or that might be a great segue.
And I will say, if anybody ever has questions, I know some of you here have done them. Call. Again, we see a lot more at WVU just because we have a much higher volume. Call. We're happy to walk you through, answer questions to the best of our ability. We're here. If we can help in any way, please reach out.
That's great. Thanks, Carrie, so much. Allison, I'll pull up the case. You can walk us through it and then we'll have a discussion. But so just give me 1 second and then you can take it away here. All right, go for it.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Allison. I am I am one of the case managers now for our care team, which is our behavioral intervention team here on campus. And so we've done a couple of these. Our most recent one was really tricky, but it was an international student, had like a lot of extra things to it that I thought maybe would be like not relevant to other campuses necessarily. It was, this was one that happened at the very beginning of the semester, fall semester. And so some of the questions that I'm hoping to prompt discussion and get feedback on is what has worked for others in conveying concerns or urgency for parental response. Sometimes when we call parents and we say, hey, we're seeing this XYZ, the student will minimize it to the parents, or the parents might minimize it to us. I'm always of the thought of, if the school takes the time to call you, that's something, in general, but that's not really how it's always perceived. So looking for some feedback on what's worked for others in that regard. And also sometimes we have parents saying, yeah, no, I'm actually really worried about my kid too. What are you going to do about it? And so really just having those kind of conversations and that balance of responsibility for an individual. So would love for you all to look at this situation with that lens in mind and hoping to get some feedback on that. So for the background information, it's literally the first week of school, August. And we had a student that was here years ago and then was gone for a few years and came back. He, I think was like 24, 25, and chose to live in the residence hall with freshmen, 18-year-olds. So in the first week of school, we got an incident report from the residence halls that he was making other students feel uncomfortable. The way that he spoke to staff was kind of curt with students. He hugged someone without permission. He was talking about drug use and saying that he assaulted somebody, and just really making people feel uncomfortable and unsafe. And so they had our university police respond, who kind of talked to him,
and de-escalated it. He was a little escalated when they came, but de-escalated the situation and kind of said, you know, you're making people uncomfortable, like, you know, tone it down a bit. This is literally like within the first few days of school. Then ROTC contacted their university police for assistance. The student had gone to them and tried to enroll, but he actually was in the process of leaving ROTC at that very time. So they were confused and, you know, he was kind of hanging around and they just thought it was a weird interaction. So they contacted our university police just to let them know about it and see if they needed to do anything. Then also that same week, the football stadium has like a football facility where the athletes can go. And so he was going around there, going into locker rooms, areas that generally are not for the general public. And he was telling everyone that he was going to be a walk-on. And, you know, it was like talking to teammates saying, we're going to play together. And so they had asked him to leave and he came back another time, I believe, and they eventually trespassed him from it. They also contacted university police saying, hey, this is weird. And then that week, we also found out that the weekend before school started, he had come to town and stayed in a hotel downtown and was assaulted. So essentially through our behavioral intervention team, we're getting these pings from our residence hall, we're getting it from our university police. And when we met the first week, we're like, what's going on with this student? That kind of goes into what's been done so far in the first week. I'm jumping around a little bit, but so we spoke to the father. He actually had called the residence hall and they referred him to me because they knew he was a care case. And he had some financial issues. He had a balance due. He was going to get removed from classes if he didn't pay it. And also he thought that he had moved out or got kicked out of the residence hall that first week because he wasn't able to use his key card appropriately, which was not really the case. So I took that opportunity to talk to the father. I expressed concern about his mental health. And we did have a previous report from the first time he was here. Father basically shared he had irregular engagement with treatment. The first care report from years ago, he said, well, actually, that was just like, we thought maybe schizophrenia due to like substance abuse, like synthetic marijuana, essentially. And then he just hasn't been regular enough with treatment. He won't stay on medication, but we think maybe he's like bipolar, maybe he's manic right now. We don't really know because he won't, you know, stay in care long enough. But the father's like, you should totally get him connected to care. That's a great idea. You should, you know, when I tell him to go to the psychiatrist, it doesn't work, but you should totally get him there. And so Carrie and her crew really felt it was important to like set some expectations before we went into that first weekend of school. And so they met with him just to talk about some of those issues that had arisen. And they also referred him to the counseling center, which he agreed to go immediately from their office. And so they discussed the residence hall, the ROTC. I can't remember at this time if we knew about the football situation that very moment. We did. Okay. So that's what happened. Basically told him, you know, hey, watch out, you know, your behavior is causing concern. But at that point, we really felt it was disruptive and not dangerous because he was just having all of these really odd interactions across campus. Okay. So then that weekend, our university police was literally monitoring like the call log of all the PD offices in town. And so in that next weekend, the next couple days, he was accused of running around in the courtyard of the residence hall with a knife without a shirt on and threatening other students. Then he was involved with a fist fight outside of our student union. And then later that same night got assaulted by another group of students. And then a few days later, he had called the Job Accommodation Network asking for an ESA and then threatened to like bomb them if they didn't give him a support dog. So at that point, we're like, okay, this is definitely like in just a matter of days, totally changed. And so again, I engaged with the father. We fact checked some of the things he said because he did say some odd things about like that he did have assault charges and that he was in the military, he had altitude sickness. He just said some weird things. He was also trying to sell his car And we were worried that that might be a financial burden too. So I talked to the father about that. The father said, yes, please sell the car. He can't afford those payments. That's a good thing. And I said, okay. What happened is Carrie placed him on interim suspension because of all like the violent threats. So that essentially removes him from campus until we can have a hearing to determine if he's able to remain a student or not. During that time, we also wrote and worked on the mental hygiene petition because it was very clear that something needed to be stabilized, essentially. So we talked to the father. At this point in time, instead of saying, the 3 phone calls prior, like, you all should totally get him to the hospital, he decided he also felt the need to do a hygiene petition as well in the student's home state, which was not the same as West Virginia. And he also disclosed that he did have 2 assault charges like the 3 weeks leading up to school. So this had been escalating violence that he just didn't share with us until, I guess, there was more evidence of more of it. So the father filled out the petition in his home state and wanted the student to like drive there, which we know that he was in the process of selling his car. And we also saw through, I think, observation and then police reports that his car was abandoned downtown with like flat tires, several flat tires. So he really didn't even have a way to get home anyhow. So we moved forward with our petition on our end. And so the student was really unpredictable. It was hard, even though he lived in a residence hall, he was trying to actively move out. We could check his card swipes. He would swipe in at 2 in the morning, 7 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. I mean, there was no pattern, rhyme, or reason that we could predict where he would be and when. And so it was really difficult of like trying to figure out when this might be served. How can we know what he's up to in the interim? And so essentially, the hygiene petition did take much longer than we had hoped. And we didn't really know what to do. So what our police chief, who was amazing, said, well, we can detain him to, ask him these questions regarding all of these threats and these assault cases. And so we essentially kind of took him in so we knew where he was, and then called the folks serving the hygiene petition, to let them know that he was there. So he did get hospitalized, I believe, for the full 30 days. And we were able to facilitate kind of a withdrawal thereafter, get as much money back as we could for the family. So I think that's all I've got to share. We had quite a few different units involved, but it really was, I wish we were able to have better conversations with the father early on. I encouraged him prior to that weekend when all the violence happened. I encouraged him to come here and be with his son, come move his son home. He said he didn't have time for that. And so, when we were talking about moving out, he said he didn't have time to come move him out. He should drive home. And so it was just really challenging to convey our concerns. And then later knowing that there were concerns there too, maybe that the family was kind of overlooking. So I think I'll be quiet for now.
Great job, Allison. So we'll throw it to the group, and kind of as a reminder, we're looking for kind of both sides of the coin here. What can the people who are the counselors and the mental health workers, what can we do to hopefully be responsible for their new well-being? And then also how to convey that urgency for parental response, just like Allison said, those conversations and things like that. Go ahead, Margaret. I see you raised your hand. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, thanks. I just have a clarifying question, Allison. So you mentioned that the student was put on interim suspension after the weekend, but that then there were concerns about whether he would be like safe in the residence halls. If I was understanding you correctly, would the interim suspension have not included suspension from the residence halls and being removed from campus?
Yes, it would include that. So with the timing, we essentially did the interim suspension and the petition at the same time. So we were hoping that they would come essentially grab him immediately. And so we did not cut off access immediately, I think, to his key card because we had no other means of knowing where he was. So you can see card swipes into the residence halls. But when we realized that they weren't serving it as soon as they were, then that's when we had our police take kind of custody of him. Typically, our campus is only like a fifth on campus. Everyone else is off campus. So typically with the interim suspension, they're already off campus and we just keep them from coming back on. So okay. Residence hall is a little bit different.
And I can speak to that too, Margaret. Part of the concern is it takes time once they get that for them to receive it. And so it was just the you know, by the time, again, he would have to receive it in his email to be put on notice. So it was just the practicality of the time frame, you know, the hour, 2 hour, whatever it may be, by the time he got that and then actually getting him out. So we were just concerned timing, if that makes sense. But no, it absolutely would have included the residence hall.
Yeah, and I think this was a question that came up for me when you were speaking, Carrie, as well, because we were talking about how it can be days before they come get picked up. And so you have this person that you've determined to be potentially unsafe on your campus for like 3 days. And so that was one of the things that came up for me was I was wondering, would an interim suspension be appropriate in that regard? Because you're still giving the student due diligence. You're saying, hey, we don't have all the information yet. You know, we need to have this, you know, I mean, I guess you're then kind of announcing to the student that a petition has been made potentially, but I didn't know if that, you know, that could come with all kinds of other legalities and liabilities, but I didn't know how other people felt about that. Because I think it does put the college in a difficult position if the college has determined that somebody is unsafe. Yes, that student has to have their due legal process, but the college also has to make conduct decisions then for the college. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Carrie or Allison, but.
And we use interim suspension in that situation, yes, where we determine there's a safety risk to people on campus. You know, but the practicality and it's obviously best case scenario is a parent is involved and picks up their student and does what they need to do, you know, as well as that does not happen. And so we've had some, and then students become, you know, like they're wandering downtown and, you know, so I think the question is the risk that puts. And so, no, I hear you. I think that I can tell you our general counsel is very involved in those decisions and those discussions as we make that in terms of the institutional liability versus the safety and well-being of the student. It's a tough, it's not always an easy balance, but yeah, those are always something that we consider as a tool.
And the one before that, it took several days. That student's family was in town. They were with her the entire time. And so again, like only a fifth of our students are on campus. This, I think, is the first interim suspension in the last 5 years of an on-campus student. Everyone else is off campus. So it's a little bit different from a campus that might be more residential.
Great, thank you guys.
Cynthia, you're up next.
Sorry. I really feel for everyone who's trying to deal with this on a college campus, because especially the parental piece, the parents may have been dealing with this for several years and they're frustrated by the system, and there's almost a relief when they get their kids to a college campus and they don't know what to do. So they're really depending on you as part of the system to try and help. So I'm not surprised at the father's response, but I do really, it places the college in a really difficult situation. And, but it's reality, and we all have to figure out how to manage it. We almost become locus parentis, right? Is that the right word?
Well, and this father wanted us to allow him to drive 6 hours home. In this state of mind where he was just, at one point, I think he thought he was in a video game. There was some discussion about being a character, and we were going to put him in a car and let him drive 6 hours on a highway someplace else. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just share too, with this case didn't get that far, but that same week we had another student that was heading down the same path with parents. They had actually called the Parents Club and admissions to ask if he was here because they didn't know where he went. And he just left the house with the laundry basket of stuff. And so they wanted us to check his card swipes, check his attendance, make sure he's eating, make sure he's bathing. I mean, everything. They found his vehicle abandoned, and they wanted us to go find him. And, he was a residence hall student. And so I basically shared that we can't be in loco parentis, right? Because we don't have the ability or facilities to do that. And then in which I was told that I didn't care about their student. That's why, you're not doing this because you don't care, so I definitely understand that there's like an exhaustion that comes with it. But I sometimes I just really have a hard time breaking through to say, if you're concerned that your student is not eating or bathing, how do you think that they're going to be academically successful on a college campus? And so even that, sometimes they say, no, they'll turn it out. It's fine. So if there's any kind of approaches that folks have been successful with in those kind of hazy territories, I would love to hear, because I don't think I've got it figured out just yet.
I think the other thing we need to remember is sometimes the parents are dealing with their own mental health issues and their own substance use issues, and they are not equipped to really figure this out. So it is really a tough one.
And it's not to say this insensitively, but I feel like some of the conversations I've had with parents, and again, I really recognize that this is a hardship, is the financial piece, right? They really want that student to make it through the semester so they can get those credits and have it not feel like maybe a financial burden for the family. So sometimes I do actually approach it that way, right? I'm like, well, okay, we can try to work with them, but if they're not academically successful, here's what ultimately that is going to mean financially, and how is that different? So, it hurts my heart when it has to become those kinds of conversations, when it really should be about the mental health and the well-being of the student. But sometimes we're trying to reach parents in whatever way we can to just express the urgency of how we feel. And if we're the mental health professionals and we really have concerns and the parents aren't taking that bite, how do we really express it in a different way and have it make sense to them from that logical side even?
No, that's an excellent point and strategy I have definitely used. So in this particular case study, given the timing of it, that was a conversation I had several times with the father. So because he had an outstanding bill, he could have been removed from classes. And then that means that any money they had paid in, they would get automatically back. So if he withdrew in the first week, 100% refund. Anything after that is not full refund. So the father was like, I'm not going to pay for him to come here unless he gets treatment. And I said, great, don't pay his bill. That is your carrot for the situation. And I even had that conversation before that weekend when things escalated, and found out on Friday he paid a third of it, got him on a payment plan. So he actually just, lost all that money because we weren't able to advocate thereafter. And so even then, where it seemed like everyone was on board, and that was kind of where we were going, it's still, and I don't ever want to be a person to say that someone's not capable of doing something or being successful. So it is kind of a hard line. I did try to do the, weighing your financial options. But I think the father just really wanted him to be here instead of home.
I had something I wanted to add. I saw an op-ed in the last couple of weeks about college choice and considering mental health services on the campus. So as a student is deciding where they're going to go, looking at what the school can provide. And so this kind of conversation always makes me kind of think backward and think about prevention and think about what can be communicated to parents and families in advance and students in advance. So we know that a large percentage of high school students have mental health diagnoses and are already coping with their mental health as students in the K through 12 system. So thinking through how to communicate to them, how to look for a school that's going to be able to meet their needs, and also put that plan into place for their own care is important, and something I think that we can even integrate more into the college access work that we're doing at HEPC and that some of the schools are doing as well.
I think that's a great point, Carolyn. I mean, the college experience, that's changed. It's just, that's with COVID and everything else, it's changed. And so need to change the way we approach it.
And I think that can be difficult from like a branding standpoint. And I'm maybe just talking about our campus too, is that they don't really want in their advertisement of students to come here to say, when you have problems, when you come here, here are mental health services. So they're very averse to introducing like our behavioral intervention team, our mental health resources. They have made efforts for current students, but we're still having a lot of trouble like with orientation being a part of any of that because they feel it indicates that students will have problems. Now, I think everyone on this call knows the students are going to have problems regardless if we say here's a resource or not. But, you know, that is a challenge, I think, on our campus. We've really been kind of butting up to lately.
That's one area, sorry if I'm talking too much. That's one area where I've been able to be successful on my campus. We are quite small. I will certainly own that. But I have inserted myself into the orientation where I have a table and every single incoming student gets a brochure for my office that has also like the suicide prevention number, you know, so that I can at least, now brochures are a little bit, you know, tricky because we know students are so good at keeping hold of hard copy pieces of paper and materials, right? But if nothing else, it puts it in their hand and puts it in their mind that these are services that are available, and hopefully they're sticking it somewhere. And then if they do ever need it for themselves or a peer, they're able to kind of remember, oh, that's right, I have those numbers. Where do I find that? And we put those numbers a lot of other places too, but I think it does help with the visibility of services right off the bat. And helping students know that those are available, I hope.
Any other questions or comments? It's a great case, Allison. Led to great discussion, a lot to talk about for sure. There isn't anything else. We will wrap up. I'm going to put the link into the session evaluation, but please, you know, please give us your comments. We're definitely going to be, you know, putting our heads together, thinking about what's next, because this is our last session. So your opinions really do matter, because it's going to help us plan the next thing. I think Carolyn put a message in earlier that, you know, we are going to be taking a, you know, close look at those. So all the comments matter. So please take the time to do that. I'll open it to Carolyn if you wanted to say anything, but I think we're at the end.
I just wanted to say a big thanks to WVCTSI and Jay for partnering with us to make this possible. We've had great turnout on all the sessions and it's been really informative. So please do fill out the evaluation. And if you have suggestions for not only future topics, but you know, ways that we might grow or narrow down the audience for this type of education, just let us know. And it's been great spending this time with you all. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you all.
Yeah. All right, everybody, take care.